Hi everybody, Stephan Kesting from Grapplearts.com. Today I'm here with my friend Steve Whittier, who's known for a bunch of things. I mean, you're pretty heavily involved in the straight blast gym, jiu-jitsu community. You're involved in the BJJ Over 40 website. You've coached a number of MMA fighters. And I thought it'd be a really good opportunity today to pick your brain about training methods and teaching methods and drilling and going down that rabbit hole.
Right.
But to start out with, I just want to give the people a little bit of a background of who you are and what your background is, and then we'll get into all that good stuff. And I promise people there is a ton of good stuff here because we've pre-discussed this, and I'm already excited about what we're going to be doing today.
Awesome, yeah. We talked about it for about a year now, right? So
who are you, and why should we care?
Right. So Steve Whittier, I own SBG East Coast in Massachusetts, and that's an affiliate of Straight Blast Gym International. And I've been doing martial arts for, 20-something years, like well over 20 years. Started off, like a lot of people, what was available. Was doing karate. As soon as I started doing martial arts, I was voracious with it. I knew that I was into it, what I wanted to do. The UFC was just sort of emerging shortly after that, so I was keeping an eye on that and interested, and like a lot of people, I was interested in Bruce Lee and reading Dao Jeet Kune Do. I wound up getting into a number of classical martial arts, started to get into...
so I'll stop you there.
Okay.
What martial arts did you do?
Oh, okay. So
karate?
So a few different... One primary style that I went through to black belt, and then I also trained with a number of people from different other karate styles that I would pick things up. My dirty little secret was I actually was a live-in student at an Aikido place where I traveled across the country and like lived there for a summer, and had visions of being able to do like Steven Seagal stuff, like, because this is way back, first Above the Law, and I was kind of convinced, that you could
if you were in a coma for 2 years and then came to in a hospital, then you'd be able to defeat a whole bunch of people attacking you.
Exactly, because they will attack you in a sequence like that, one at a time, so you can hurl them through the air.
Grab my wrist. Yeah. No, my other wrist. No, with the other hand.
Exactly.
With the fingers this way.
Because everybody attacks you with a knife like this, right? And then I very quickly realized it's not like that. So, I just, the theory of it is great, but I realized quickly I wasn't into it. So I spent some time doing that. And then I really got into, I was interested in function. So I got into the Jeet Kune Do side, kickboxing, Filipino martial arts, kind of all the requisite stuff. So a little bit of original JKD concepts, through there. But what I was finding is that as I got into it, I was very into the theory of the JKD material, but what was coming out when I was actually testing it in a live environment was it would be either basically kickboxing, kickboxing, or grappling of some sort. And that was kind of like pre-MMA. And so then I was coming to these conclusions that my interests were lying beyond the curriculum that I was learning. So, I had a good coach and everything, but it was still kind of tied to the old curriculum. So I was really getting into function, and that's when I started to pay attention to Matt Thornton, who felt like, with that, he's one of my best friends in the world now. But at the time, I saw a thing in Black Belt magazine, and somebody had it, and I took a look, and then I wound up saying, it sounds interesting, functional JKD, I'll get that. And then I checked it out, and I felt like he was having a conversation with me. And lo and behold, as I've talked to other SBG coaches in the organization, came from all different areas of martial arts and everything. We all had kind of that, the first generation of us, we all had that same same phenomenon where we're already thinking these things, and then we get this guy who's kind of
who's actually saying it out loud.
Yeah, he's saying it out loud, kind of brash way, and so gravitated, in that direction. So that was years ago. At the same time,
and just to be clear, what was he saying out loud? Because not everybody.
So that's right. That's right. So we were talking about that. So Matt coined the term, which sometimes people still to this day, that's nothing new. He coined the term aliveness. And as he said over and over again, he coined the term, he didn't invent the concept. Aliveness was always there. And basically, in a nutshell, aliveness refers to the fact that once you've gotten past the pure rote learning of a technique in any area of martial arts, not just Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but in any area, then it has to be alive, which means if it's going to be functional. And aliveness means energy, not crystals and levitating energy, but resistance of some degree from an opponent. Doesn't mean full resistance necessarily. Doesn't mean just full sparring.
So you're trying to do something to somebody and they're not trying to let you do it without resistance.
Exactly. So there's some degree of resistance or energy, motion, and timing. And so motion would be realistic movement that you would do, not scripted, right? Realistic movement you would do in a real life situation, whether it's self-defense, sport, MMA, whatever. It would be realistic. It's not in a pattern. And again, timing, not in a pattern. So a lot of times if you're doing a preset drill, like an energy drill, there's various examples of that. Some people will come up with variables to throw into the drill. But if the drill is still in a pattern, the variables, it isn't timing. So that's not to be confused with timing. Timing would be, again, the type of timing you would get from a real person who, if you have an objective, they have a counter objective. And then you have something that looks like a sport or a fight or something like that. So one of the common...
Can you think of an example in another sport? Aliveness training? Sure.
So if you are trying to do a play in basketball, for instance, right? So you would be going down the floor, say you're the point guard, and now you actually have somebody who's trying to not only block you from moving, they're trying to knock the ball out, take over the play, steal the ball from you, and you've got to negotiate your way around them. You've got to be able to fake them out. You've got to be able to protect the ball. You've got to be able to look for the pass, not have the pass stolen by another player or by the guy who's guarding you. Or you need to be able to shoot while he's got his hand in your face. And a dead drill or a dead pattern would be basically running plays.
Point guard, kata number 1.
Yes, exactly. And so there's a lot of space in between, like a kata and some of the drills, because in some of the drills that are actually dead drills, like Chisao or something like that, people would say, we're touching each other and there's movement there, and then if I break the pattern and all of a sudden come around with a strike or something, see, there's timing, but it's still always compartmentalized within the pattern. And in a lot of cases, if you did those types of drills, which at a certain time we thought were cool because that's what we had available to us in a certain range of inside fighting and creating connection and attachment and striking and things like that. There's a certain point where you and another person familiar with the drill could close your eyes and do it, which in a demo looks great because people who aren't educated be like, holy shit, they're both going with both hands, or in some cases with weapons, they both have sticks and they're going. But if you can close your eyes, then it's not fighting. Unless you're actually talking about jiu-jitsu or something where there's total attachment. But if you're talking about now you throw strikes in and there's a little distance between you and you're not attached with a grappling situation, then something's fishy, right? So, yeah, I could go on, but I think people probably get the idea. So anyway, in terms of my background, we started to go in that direction. And I guess the moral of the story, so digress one more time and come back. So the moral of the story of that is, if you want to get the benefits of a drill that is dead, then it's very simple how to do that. Instead of doing the dead drill and being attached and indoctrinated to a certain way of training because somebody before you and somebody before them who respected each other and is a master of wholesome, instead of going by agenda, you go by reality. So reality is always good enough. You always go what actually works, and then I'm going to do that. And if I figure out a better way to do it, then we will test it like a scientific experiment, and then we will do that. So if you want to make a drill...
How do you judge reality, though? Because there's always the out of, this stuff's too deadly to train. Sure, you can test your boxing in the ring,
Mm-hmm.
but in the street we actually eye gouge and bite carotid arteries, or we only ever fight with edged weapons as opposed to sticks.
Yeah.
So you can always drop, or we train.
Yeah,
the reason we're doing this kata hopping around like we're pretending we're on a horse, so we're actually training for multiple opponents, and you can't do that in sparring.
Right. Well,
so you can. I've done it. It really hurts.
Yeah, it's
incredibly tiring.
Yeah, it's never a good thing, no matter how skilled you are. Right. It's never a good proposition. But so how do we do it? So we actually had a SBG camp. We do them twice a year. One of the early ones I went to, I think it was back probably 2003. It's a long time ago. And the theme of the camp was actually self-defense. So we would, we had some striking sections and some, kind of vale tudo sections and stuff. But one of the things we did with jiu-jitsu, which is where back when, Horian Grayson was writing for magazines and everything and getting into the whole, street debate and why jiu-jitsu is the best. And he was selling the Gracie brand, right? But he was also making some very good points at the time. And there were a lot of people coming out and naysaying his position and trying to say why, their style. And again, it's all agenda, right? But so let's figure it out, right? So we would actually do some drills over the course of the camp to prove what we already knew from our own experience, but we did it with the whole camp, which was, we actually had some guys bring glasses and stuff like that and say, okay, from this position, right, I'm trying to hold guard, and you can now not only try and pass my guard, but you can, hit me, not full steam, when you're trying to knock anybody's teeth, but you'd know if you're getting hit repeatedly that would be bad, right? Hit me, poke me in the eye, grab my nuts, right? Okay, so we work up, and so what happened is, what we already knew is that the people with the superior delivery system, the people who had the most skill, that spent a little bit of time being familiar with how to defend those lines of attack, were no problem.
Again, I've always said it doesn't take a whole lot of getting punched in the face for you to, if you're skilled at jiu-jitsu, to figure out that you have to modify your jiu-jitsu. Like, okay, maybe this kind of putting your hands behind your head and lying back so that nobody can get a grip of your sleeves isn't a good idea in a
exactly. And then the other side of it is pretty simple. If you have more skill, your tendency to be able to achieve a dominant position is higher too. And at that point, if your whole game for defense is based on street tactics, so I'm going to grab your nuts, or I'm going to bite you while you have a underhook sit out, top position or mount or something like that.
The person on top has got way more options.
Yes, and now you've just pissed off the person who's on top. So now all of a sudden they start dropping elbows and they poke you in the eye, and it's very easy to do the experiments, which were part of that camp, where say, okay, so, I cross sides or something, and now you're going to try and bite me in the rib. Well, guess what? Now I'm going to do horrific things to you, which you're not in a position to be able to defend. So it's almost like, why would you give that person the idea that, oh, by the way, okay, well, I'm going to bite you now. I'm going to bite your face. Yeah. So this is kind of silly things if you get it, but it's just to kind of prove that the skill and the functional, we call delivery system, because it's not style specific. There's
what are some examples of your delivery system? So
the whole idea behind the delivery system is this: if you so Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, for instance, which as Matt points out, isn't really we say Brazilian because we pay homage to the evolution that took place through the Brazilians, but like really Jiu-Jitsu, if you look at martial arts as physics and science, then there's no Chinese mathematics, right? It's just, there's math, and this is just Jiu-Jitsu, but it's a grappling system.
They helps distinguish it from the more dead forms of jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, exactly.
Of grab my wrist and
There's a thing. There's a thing there, but it's just so. I only say that because we want to. When we talk about delivery systems, we're kind of removing the investments of style. Mm-hmm. So what we just look at. So if you do look at the UFC, for example, right? So obviously there are rules set, and it's within a physical environment. And now they've really, tried to make it the rule set reflect a proper sport with safety protocols and everything. And there's weight classes. We get all that. But regardless, from day one, what you saw emerging to the top, even when there were very few rules, was the jiu-jitsu guys, the wrestlers, a few judo people, and in striking, you see what? Boxing, Muay Thai, and Greco-Roman for clinch, and there's a reason for that. And so when you start talking about street versus self-defense, what you should be paying attention to that's true is tactical considerations, but not the delivery system, because a delivery system should transcend the environment. It should transcend, do we have cloth? Do we not have cloth? Is the person trying to hit me in the face? Are we just wrestling, type of thing? And that's true because it's a skill set. And if you look at all the forms of self-defense that work the best in an alive environment, even if somebody is trying to hurt you, even if they, break a bottle and have a thing, now all of a sudden the broken bottle becomes an edged weapon. If you look at that, you don't all of a sudden change your skill set because somebody just broke a bottle, right? The thing that we know works the best to control somebody in the clinch is going to be wrestling or judo tactics. That doesn't change, and you don't all of a sudden start doing kung fu or Krav Maga or something because somebody did this, right? Yeah. If you want to be able to control that, are you going to get cut? Most likely, that's reality again. There's no way around reality. And again, how do we test that? Carl Tanswell, my buddy who has the best edge weapons defense in the world that I've ever seen. He and his crazy little guys and the mad scientists, they did it all with marker blades, and they literally did testing fully in a live environment from low level all the way through to full, assaulting each other with these things and glasses on so they didn't get poked in the eye, and what marked them up the least. And so the dominant position in his whole approach, which is very simple, is the 2-on-1 or the Russian position. It's wrestling. And that's verified, time and time again. And I've done it in my own school and everything, and it's true. So it's not. And by the way, he can do the Filipino martial arts curriculum and all the catch, pass, and disarm and stuff. He still knows that. He can still do it. He looks great at it. After he got stabbed 7 times outside of a club in a random assault, and woke up in the hospital, luckily a woman was there to. Who was a nurse that put a credit card over his neck so he didn't bleed out. This is a crazy story, but he kind of threw out the old stuff and he said, let's really figure out what works here. And he came up with a stab program, survival tactics against the blade. It's awesome. And he's the first one to tell you this is a zero-sum game. There's no good knife defense. If you're empty-handed and somebody has a knife, you're looking to survive, and the whole assumption of it is that you're probably already getting cut before you realize you're in a knife fight, right? But if you don't have a gun or something like that, and this person's already on you, which a lot of people statistically think they're getting hit before they realize they're being stabbed, then this is the best, most verified thing that we found that will give you a chance to survive that, walk away. And it's wrestling. It's not catch, pass, all that stuff. It's very simple. Couple of control positions that are derived from wrestling and Greco. So I can't remember where I was before that, but
I think we were talking about delivery system.
Delivery system. So the idea of delivery system.
Transcending the.
I'll give you an example that we've used for years. So if you take a couple of guys like cavemen, primitive, and they have no access to any type of fighting training, haven't seen it in media or anything like that, and you throw them together, they'll start off just clubbing each other, looking for a stick or a stone or something to bash each other over the head. They're going to start doing just ugly brawling, and then it will look like two guys that are untrained outside of a club or something like that. And then if they keep doing it, it's going to evolve into something that looks like boxing eventually, because that's a functional delivery system. Because you will figure out pretty quickly it's good to hit and bad to get hit.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to start seeing the posture change. You're going to start seeing things with footwork. You're going to see the hands go from down here to up here to here.
Then and historically, how did we get to like beautiful kung fu forms?
I'll give you my personal thing. Is,
where people are hopping around.
Again, I believe that's where, for all this stuff, you know, I could name specific names, but I won't. But
just you and I. It's just you and I.
But so I've personally trained with, you know, guys that are famous in their art, and what I would consider to be primarily dead arts, but like they're famous. And in one case in particular, I can think of a legendary fighter in his style that had challenge matches and everything that are apparently verified. I wasn't there myself because it was well before me, but then teaches an almost entirely dead pattern curriculum. And so it made me think about that question, and I believe it's what happens when we try and systematize something. Because, you know, if this person is good at this particular field of combat and actually like did it for real against people that, you know, in a situation where you could potentially wind up dead, and you know, retired some people, then why does it now look like this? Because that was obviously alive. This is so probably the answer is just, you know, this person did this a ton, was just naturally incredibly, you know, quick, and practiced this thing and was faster and a little more skilled than the other people. And then everybody said, teach me. So he goes, okay, well, how do I do this? Okay, well, I'm going to turn this into a, you know, 13 count pattern. I'm going to do these dead drills. And so as things become systematized, I think that's where the issue comes up, that we have classical styles. It's not that the techniques are necessarily invalid. You know, in my own training, like in striking, I'm pulling out stuff that I learned from classical martial arts years ago in live sparring against good guys and pulling it off. You know, like you see one of our SBG stablemates, like Conor McGregor, you know, rising to ascendancy in the UFC right now, and he's doing like Taekwondo techniques and sometimes like, you know, doing some crazy blocks and stuff like that. And he does it, but what you should take away from that isn't the validation of all of a sudden the guy who's doing you know, this type of thing going like, see, oh, I just saw freeze frame the camera. I just saw my technique. See, it does work because Conor McGregor did it or something. It's not the technique is invalid. It's the delivery system and the alive training methods that you're using or not using that's going to determine, and so, to some degree, the athlete, right? But largely, it's just going to be how are you delivering that technique, and when are you delivering it? What's your timing? What's your execution? If it's coming from this classical style that's detraining you to be able to do that in a live environment, then it won't work.
Well, this is something that Dan Santo has spoken about. That there's the techniques, the sidekick, the armbar, the whatever.
Right.
There's your techniques that make up a style. There are the training methods that make up a style, and there are the training equipment that makes up a style.
Yep.
If you and I were practicing our jiu-jitsu, but we were only out on pavement, our jiu-jitsu would look quite different. I guarantee you, I would not be pulling guard ever if I had a choice. I mean, I've gotten been stupid enough. I went through a phase of doing jiu-jitsu mostly on carpet because that's all I had.
Right.
And the amount of rug burns I had, people would look at me and were thinking I was having some pretty wild sex at the time. Covered in rug burns everywhere. And as it turns out, that wasn't the case. It was really, honest honey, it was training at the tiny little club. But, boxing without gloves would look very different, and does look very different when you go to smaller gloves and bare knuckle.
It does.
That changes.
Yep.
So yeah, there's the techniques, the training methods, and the training equipment to some extent. And it sounds like we're really talking about the training. You could have a totally valid technique, but how do you train it? Right. So that's really what we've been talking about.
Right, exactly. Method. But even in those conditions where it would look different, so that's where you talk about the tactics are dictated by environment, but the delivery system remains the same. Right. So that what's functional is functional. So again, I took the striking example. If you take a grappling example, two guys completely untrained, no knowledge, have never seen anything around wrestling, jiu-jitsu, or anything like that, and you task them with, like, wrestle each other, right? They start wrestling each other to exhaustion. They do that every single day. Eventually, you're going to see something evolve. It isn't a style. We're not talking judo, sambo, newaza and judo, sambo, Brazilian jiu-jitsu. You're going to start to just see something that looks like Brazilian jiu-jitsu, by which I mean not a discrete, idiosyncratic style, but just this science of moving on the ground. People are going to evolve towards that because it's going to take place in an alive environment. It's not going to take place through a curriculum that's being handed down.
How long till they evolve to something like Jeff Glover or the Sakurabas who are doing things from outer space?
Probably about as long as it's taken for that to happen.
Yeah.
Right? So, yeah, you see these little explosions of plateau busters throughout time. Bruce Lee was one.
Sure.
But he wasn't the first. It's just his place in culture because of his stature and his kind of
access to media,
he was so charismatic too, and quite frankly, a lot of his philosophy was co-opted from other sources and everything, but he put it out in a unique way that was very controversial at the time. So that was like one plateau busting, and then we've got other ones that
the Gracie's arriving, and
the Gracie's,
the Gracie in Action / UFC, certainly,
and with SBG and everything. I think the whole aliveness thing was another ripple effect that was, another predecessor to like modern MMA. We were doing MMA when it was still Vale Tudo, before the MMA term existed. But, pretty much all the stuff that people are talking about now with integrating everything was pre that happening in the UFC. Like back when it was still style versus style, essentially, and a showcase for Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. So I was back in, I guess I never finished my background, so I was back in Massachusetts, and I had a really good place to learn Jiu-Jitsu, so I'm a black belt under Roberto Maia, who's kind of the godfather, not kind of, he was the godfather of Jiu-Jitsu in New England. He was the guy that brought real Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu there. And has some very good guys I came up training with, like Kenny Florian. I spent a lot of time with John Frankel, guy a lot of people haven't heard of unless you're from there, but he's kind of like our New England John Donaher, which is Pat Barbieri. Bunch of good training partners. So I was doing that for years now. I've been working with I'm a Sigatong trainer in Muay Thai. I've been working, private lessons and training with Mark Delagrati for many years. So I had all this going on, and I kind of look at it, SBG is kind of like the glue that binds everything, because, I had everything I needed kind of in terms of training, but the approach to combat arts and, how we distill down information, and the networking I had with the other coaches and everything has been really influential, to me. And we've all contributed pieces to that puzzle, and we continue to evolve and keep trying to make things, more and more efficient as we go.
Well, why don't we pivot on that
Okay.
and get more into the training methods?
Sure.
And why don't we start with a distinction that you've made and other people have made, the distinction between fundamentals and basics.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay, so yeah, we were talking about that before. So I have this conversation a lot in like my 40 plus series, and I've talked about it. Don't get me wrong, I've also used the terms fundamental and basics interchangeably, but I try, anytime I'm really speaking in any sort of formal way, I try and differentiate the two, because I see that the two are often confused as being the same thing, because they sound like the same thing. But really, when we're talking about a fundamental, we're talking about, I'll give you the SBG, a couple of the definitions that we use for SBG. Everybody's going to do essentially the same way. Something that everyone needs to know in order to be able to do that thing. So if we're talking about jiu-jitsu, a fundamental is something that, everybody needs to know how to do.
Give me an example, please.
So being able to break open the guard and close guard.
Okay.
Right? Because at some point somebody's going to put you in closed guard if you do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Everybody's going to need to know how to do that, right? And there's going to be certain mechanical things that are going to be universal regardless of your, personality-wise. Are you conservative? Are you aggressive? Is your game fast? Is your game slow? Are you long? Are you stocky? Are you flexible? Are you inflexible? Everybody's going to need mechanically to do those in essentially the same ways. And then also, again, we come back to fundamental will transcend environment. So, if somebody has pulls guard on you on pavement and you come down on your knees, that sucks more, but the technique doesn't change, right? So that's a fundamental. So a basic technique could be a fundamental, but a fundamental isn't limited to the idea of basics, because basics refers to things like the first techniques you'll kind of learn up to a certain point in, like, say, to get your blue belt in jiu-jitsu. So everybody knows, like, crossbody, Americana, Kimura, straight arm bar, right? For instance, that's a basic technique. How to do a triangle, how to do an arm bar from guard, sit up, do a Kimura. Those are basic techniques. But fundamentals, we look at not just technique, but that goes into, universal mechanics, base and posture, things like that. So that's why I think the focus on fundamentals and how deep that rabbit hole goes is much more than a lot of people give credit for, because they just think it means the same. Yeah, you got to know. Like, I'll talk about fundamentals, and then I'll have somebody go, yeah, absolutely, man. You got to know your basics. You got to do your basics. But a fundamental, so this is the key about fundamentals, and Matt's talked a lot about this, and this doesn't just go for jiu-jitsu, it goes, again, for everything, is there is a huge misconception, even by brown belts, black belts, some like really accomplished black belts competitively, that fundamentals are good and everybody needs to know them, but they're somewhat restrictive, because if you want to be able to get to the higher levels of the art, you do the fundamentals, yeah, got it, but now I need to move on. And really the point that we try and make is that the fundamental is, in the sense that I've defined to you, the fundamental is what allows for freedom. Because if you teach somebody, and this is a huge mistake, even again high level, super famous instructors make sometimes, is they teach their style. And if you teach your style, so let's say that I'm world class, I'm one of the best guys on the planet, but I'm incredibly explosive, and I'm stocky, and I've got these certain things that I do really well, and that's what I teach my students. Everybody says, holy shit, Steve is, like, obviously not talking about myself hypothetically, but or Professor X, right, is the best guy in the world. What an awesome teacher. What do they mean by that? It means that I'm articulate in breaking down my own style, and I'm very effective at it. And then I'll probably, because maybe I have a hardcore training environment, I'll probably have a few people that are able to can emulate that, and they'll do it really successfully. And all of a sudden, I look at my champions, right? But what nobody wants to talk about is the fact, and it will be a fact, is that probably 80 to 90% of my students are going to be mediocre at best, and I've essentially, nobody will zero in on this, but I've essentially fucked up all those guys because I've taught my style, and that's not them. And it's not only that they can't emulate my physical attributes, it's also going to be that I think different, because personality is a huge thing.
Sure.
We always talk about, like, it's kind of funny. I use one analogy, and Matt Thornton used another one for the same thing, and we compared notes years later. We're like, oh, that's funny. So he would always talk about, if you want to see how somebody does jiu-jitsu, watch how they approach women. Like, if they're single, whatever, in a bar or something, watch how they approach women. Like, try and pick somebody up. That's a little sexist because it's assuming it's a guy, right? But I always use, like, watch how somebody drives. The relationship between how they roll and how they drive. People who are, conservative tend to roll more conservative. People who are really aggressive and, cut people off and take chances. They roll.
I've never thought about either of those analogies. I'll now have to
plug it in. Yeah, it's eerily accurate.
Yeah.
And then there are people who like me, you know, are like kind of start conservative, like, and then okay, I kind of get the lay of the land. Now I become more aggressive once I feel like I have control. You know,
we're talking about your jiu-jitsu here.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, I know this.
Picking up women.
Right. I haven't picked up women for a long time. As I told you, married for 16 years. So but that's a huge factor. So if we're talking about teaching, you know, the fundamentals is very important, because it's not just about fundamentals for your personal style; it's also about for your students. And so
would you say fundamentals are true universally, regardless of physical attributes?
Right. So in other words, if you teach only or primarily fundamentals, that doesn't mean that that's all everybody in your school or your academy will do. Quite the opposite. All of my guys that are, you know, come up through the ranks, I think maybe there's one or two that have ever had a style that was really similar to mine in a meaningful way, and that was on their part, not my part, because they learned the same as everybody else. And I really, unless I'm doing a specialty class on something, I pretty much, you know, 95% of the time I teach fundamentals in class. Now, through the environment with the pressures of people training with different people and comparing notes, and people, you know, using resources like YouTube, which I try and make sure they use responsibly and not, not be technique collectors, and instructionals and things like that, you know, like I've done one section with my advanced guys on the Berimbolo once, and at some point, you know, may cycle around to it again. But I have Berimbolo guys in my gym. They just don't learn that in regular class. They learn that from rolling with other people and me kind of giving them the coordinates. Now, what I will do if I see somebody whose tendency tends to be towards a certain game, because that's how their body likes to move, is I'll give them some possibilities now. And that's the order that we always go in. So we have pressure, posture, you know, where you are in space, what's the correct mechanics from every position. That's always first. That's what we spend the majority of our time doing. Pressure, what are the pressures available, or the counter pressures from that emerge out of that posture, and then the possibilities. And we use like a tree graphic to represent that. So at the bottom is your base, you know, because if you just tip over every time you try and do something, you have nothing. So first thing you need to learn in, you know, jiu-jitsu is base. The trunk of the tree is your posture from any position. That's where everything's going to evolve out of. And then as you get up more towards the base.
So what are you defining as posture? Because people have got pretty different definitions of posture. So
Right.
just to totally nerd out for a second.
Yeah. So in other words, there's essentially, you know, really three postures in jiu-jitsu. There's there's this one, and then there's this one, like hipping in. If you look at all the positions, like there's going to be one of those that's typically appropriate at once. If I'm on bottom of cross sides, somebody's trying to smash me, you know, I'm going to be like this.
Concave and arms up.
If I'm
almost a boxing stance.
Yeah, if I'm like in a low passing position, I'm going to be, you know, kind of straight. If I'm playing, you know, knee ride or something, I'm kind of straight. Even if I'm tilted forward a little bit, my back is straight. And then if I'm on cross sides, you know, I'm kind of giving a little steamroller so that I'm arched.
Or if you're actually bridging out of something.
Yeah, exactly.
Or you're not going to maintain that.
Exactly. But the posture will be, you know, what is the ideal physical structure that you should have, regardless, again, of any individual assets there or attributes in a given position. Mechanically, what works best? And that's your posture. So then out of that posture, you have certain pressures. So defensively, I'm on the bottom of side control, and, you know, I can bump, I can directional bridge, I can pendulum, I can scoop my hip to the side, you know, without rotating. I can shrimp, which would be with the rotation. You know, those are all pressures that are going to be available depending on, you know, weight distribution and arm position and all that stuff. And those are going to emerge out of the posture. They're meaningless unless you have good posture, right? Because they're not going to work. And then you have possibilities. And
So those are the actual techniques.
Those are the actual techniques. And if you look at a room, in most cases, even high-level guys, the room is taught really with the focus on possibilities. It's going to be, okay, guys, we're going to work this today. So first thing, I'm going to do this. So put your hand here, do this, and a foot here, and it's a technical series. And that's the least thing that we are concerned with, and it comes at the end, almost in a lot of cases, an afterthought. So if I want to teach,
but how do you train that? If you're focusing on step 1 and 2,
so how do you train that? So we have a few stages of the training method. One is introduction, and that's the only part that's dead because, again, we want to make sure that the rote movement is there. People need to understand perfect form, or as close to perfect as they can get it, and they're objective with the technique. So there is a stage of dead repetition, right, where you just have to do that. But that doesn't take.
So this might be bridging in the air, just for somebody who's completely new to the sport.
Yeah, bridging in the air, and even if somebody's on top of you, so hand position. Can I do it without resistance properly, technically, correctly? Okay, cool. So that typically, if we're talking about a given movement like that should take no more than like 5 minutes for the room to get it. If there's a few more steps, typically I'll never teach more than like 3 pieces at once. So, maybe we break that up into 2 things, but in the, two pieces, and then they put it together. But that's like 5-10 minutes max. And then we go into isolation, and that's where aliveness enters the picture. And isolation is the bridge that basically takes the theory and the practice, like the idea of it, the dead repetition, and the live application, and they bring them together. And we liken that to like the dial on like the volume dial. So low level of resistance to begin with, and then we turn the dial up, and if it gets to a point where if I can do it technically correctly against subjectively like 30% resistance, then we go to 40. And what happens is then it's not the typical situation of, okay, we do dead reps for 40 minutes or something like that,
and then we spar.
Then we go spar, right? Because what happens is, you may not even arrive at what you did in class that day in sparring. Especially if you go with somebody who has your number in a certain position or is a high level or something like that. You never get a chance to do it. Or maybe you get one chance and you blew it and then it's over, right? So, every single class we're getting a lot of reps in, but not just rote repetition against a cooperative partner. We're starting off low and then getting up to a point where now you know exactly in the learning curve like where you hit your plateau, where you hit the challenge. It's like at 70%. Now all of a sudden I have trouble. I'm making some sort of mistake, or I'm behind on my timing and everything, and you can really zero in diagnostically and address that there.
Well, this requires a fairly skilled training partner. Somebody could actually not go straight to 11.
Yeah, I mean, we train people from day one. So, in my very first intro class, there's no sparring, but very, very quickly as people get through that, because we want them to really know. Kind of like the fundamentals that will get you going, and to some extent like the basic techniques. But that's a short period for most people, and then they're into class where now they're doing isolation training as well. Where now the thing about isolation training though is a lot of people say, oh yeah, we do that too, but they only do it as positional sparring. We actually have it broken out into 5 different types of drills, which have infinite amount of like permutations that you can do, and some fit certain types of situations better than others. Like there's one that's just for distance. There's another type that works particularly well for transitions, and so a lot of the technology there, has kind of evolved that we can be very versatile. And also some coaches will have certain preferences for what they naturally like click with better, and they like some better than others. But the isolation stage is key, and if it's done correctly, you'll see the athletes get better much quicker. Not just who's the most athletic in the room, because like I said, even the situation we have like Joe, world-class world-class competitor who's the teacher teaching his or her own style, and they have a few people that they point to as their proof positive, but those people are probably genetic outliers anyway that live on the mat and they're studs. They're going to get good just by virtue of rolling. If they spar, they're going to be good. You know, if we stuck them on a football field or something and they played football, they're going to be good at football, you know, like, because they're an athlete. What about the population? What about everybody? So you'll see that the whole room goes up, you know, and even people who are slower learners are not coordinated and things like that. They may still come up slower than the others, but they're coming up quicker than they would have otherwise, for sure. Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of the confusion around this topic, and we've discussed this, is not during the talk so far, is that people mean different things when they say drill.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, the only drilling's where it's all at. You know,
right.
It's not how willing you are to compete. It's how hard you're willing to drill.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But they mean different things. Like everybody, or a lot of people, mean different things by drilling.
Yeah, they do. So we were talking about this, and so in our language that we use in the organization, drill always means alive. Okay, so that means that you have introduced isolation training with progressive resistance into the picture. And progressive is the key, because when we first started talking about this, Matt, years and years ago, like he would write about it and people would always come on and he'd explain it over and over and over again. It's like, did you not just read what I read? People would say, yeah, but we can't just spar all the time. I didn't say anything about sparring. Like, you could do functional alive training and not spar, and that would be a form of isolation. It may be zeroed in on a certain moment or a certain situation, and you can go down to like real micro level, like basically the moment that somebody's about to put on the armbar, all the way to a full positional sparring situation. You can get very sniperish or very broad with isolation, but it's not. It doesn't just mean go to that position and spar full out. Like I said, it's progressive resistance, and you're doing it with partners who are trained to participate in that way and give realistic energy. So most people most of the drilling things that I've seen nowadays, with people going on is a semantics issue, because a lot of people mean like just dead repetitions, and then somebody comes on and says, well, I don't believe in drilling, and then you have you have a champion or a group of champions here and say, well, like, we're proof positive of the fact that drilling does work, and we do this, and then they snip back and forth, and then you'll even see some articles come out that are like scientific or something on drilling, and it's just that they're meaning different things by the term. So one thing that I will say is that I don't believe that just doing 1,000 repetitions of something with absolutely no resistance is worth anything.
Not worth anything. That's a bold statement.
Maybe very close to not worth anything. Negligible, right? So, it's just, they talk about neural pathways and everything. I understand that, but if you look at evolution, there are certain criteria for that, and there's going to be adaptability built into it. So you will not get the criteria of aliveness that need to be present for something to be functional in a live environment through the absence of those qualities. So there has to be adaptability. That's what it's about. So if I want to be able to do something with a slight variation in pressure from a real partner, or a slight variation in timing or something like that, I need to experience that, even if it's on a low level, and then gradually progress with that pressure and that timing. So, and that movement. So, basically that's why I say, we'll spend enough time to make sure that the person has the technique down properly, And we will talk about things like, tightness and pressure and angle and things like that. We want all those things to be there before we move on. We don't just say, half-ass it, and now let's add resistance.
So
we want it to be clean.
Well, let's take a technically complex movement like the berimbolo.
Okay.
So how long would you spend? You're saying you can teach the technical aspects of that in 5 minutes?
No, I would break that up for sure, which I did. When I did teach it, like I said, when I go into a specialty class, the first thing I wanted was for people to just understand it so they know how to defend it. And then basically what I said was, out of this room full of people, I would bet that probably no more than 2 of you is going to make this a meaningful part of your game. Sure enough, it's 2 guys. And I kind of knew who they would be too, just based on
I have that those attributes.
Yeah, they will spin upside down. I never taught them, here's a whole inversion set of techniques. They would invert naturally and they would spin. So my spinners, I predicted, and sure enough. So what happens is the rest of the people have sampled it a little bit. And part of it too was, we got all sorts of different people on the floor. So I want to make sure there's no injuries. People go on their neck wrong. So the less flexible people, how to do it without hurting themselves. So they can understand it. We could reverse engineer it and know how to deal with it if somebody does it to you, even though we don't have a ton of guys in here doing it because I'm not teaching style specific. But then the guys that started to pick it up, now I go over and I have a separate conversation with them and we work on finer points and then they start to bust it out. And next thing you know, some other people are like, oh, so what do you do from here? And then, the whole room grows and everybody's game is different. Everybody on the floor has their own unique style. So it's not limiting at all. It's actually free. What's limiting is if I taught Steve Whittier's jiu-jitsu to everybody. Mm-hmm. If I were doing berimbolo, yeah, it would be broken up into pieces. So over the course of an hour, basically, we would take, a piece at a time, add some isolation. Okay. Next piece, add some isolation. By the end, everybody was doing isolation with the move, and some people, were doing it, and some people, weren't, but those were the people that had a lot of flexibility issues. But here's the thing. At least they understood the mechanics of it. I've had guys write me through my 40-plus list, because I have a much broader reach than my own academy, who train with really world-class people. And they'll write me, because I try and take time, as I'm sure you do, to answer people and give your thoughts and stuff like that, because I generally love jiu-jitsu. Yeah. Genuine.
It gets hard.
It does. Sometimes, yeah. I mean, there was a time when I was I'd fire back to you within probably a half hour, and now it may take, a few days, but... Yeah. But I try and have these conversations with people, and a lot of them are helping people out with common struggles that, they don't realize hundreds of thousands of other people are having too. Yeah. But one of the common things I get, actually, is some world-renowned, jiu-jitsu person that is their instructor, and it's always, don't get me wrong, he's awesome. He's the man.
But I just can't do what he's showing me.
Yes, and I feel terrible about myself, and I don't know what to do. And I get this all the time. So clearly it's not the technique that's the issue, because that guy, I know who you're talking about. That guy is world class, one of the best, people in the world or something. But here's what happens when you're, a guy who's 43 and you've had, a knee replacement and, you're all jacked up or something, and somebody's trying to teach you, Kiss of the Dragon, every day in class. And, it's just my body doesn't move that way. Well, yeah. Yes, sure. So I'll give recommendations and things like that. And sometimes I tell people actually, to have a heart-to-heart with your instructor. But one of the things I can give them is the process to go through that they don't necessarily need an instructor to be there for if they understand it. So they can go to their school. They can have the benefit of the training partners and things like that. Maybe have if you feel like you're hurting yourself or it's just not working for you or something, you have a conversation with the instructor about modifying some of your movements, but then you find somebody who's a good partner for you and you put in some work outside, whether it's grabbing somebody during an open mat or I used to do, take the folding mats and go to my friend's house and move the coffee table and roll them out, and we just put in some work on that process that will bring you along, so you're basically doing some supplemental extracurricular. but you do this. And, you know, I've had people do that successfully, come back and report to me and say, oh, it's made a big difference, you know, focusing on the fundamentals.
So then, is that your advice to people who are over 40?
No, it depends.
Well, let's talk about this over 40 business. Okay. You are over 40?
Yes.
Okay. Well, you've established your bona fides. And I'm assuming your ability to pull stuff off physically has changed over the years, and your ability to recover from exercise has changed?
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, physically I'm better than I was when I was younger, but I've taken so much wear and tear, and I've had so many, you know, surgeries or herniations or whatever, that's really the limiting factor. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so my recovery is different, and I can do things still well, and in some cases better, but I pay for them, so I try and not do them. If that makes sense.
Indiana Jones line about it's not the years, it's the mileage.
Yes, it is the mileage. Yeah, and plus, you know, back in the day, it was like, I mean, I had, you know, great teachers and training partners and everything, but the modalities that we have now are just so much different. You know, I mean, I remember my very first formal jiu-jitsu class, not just like wrestling around with my, you know, guys in my JKD place, but like when I first went to train my jiu-jitsu school, it's like day one, you know, I'm sparring full out with some of the guys, and like I remember choking this guy as hard as I could because I thought he was going to kill me. And then, you know, somebody armbarred me, and I didn't really understand how to tap, and nobody actually said it. So, like, I felt my elbow go pop, pop, and I'm like, you know, it was just a Wild West. So, you know, I remember back in the day, there's like 30 or 40 guys that were kind of like always around because you could tell they just really loved jiu-jitsu. And then there's this revolving door. And I think a lot of us came up in a similar environment, you know. And you know, if you want to be a professional academy owner, that's not the best way to do it. You know, so we've learned for those reasons too, but it's also about the student's performance, because number one, if I want to make you good, I got to keep you. But also I want to have a process to lay the foundation, have a really well thought out curriculum, and then have those modalities that we can progress you and take you seamlessly, systematically from A to B to C. And that is a curriculum based in fundamentals and aliveness.
So then how does that change for the person over 40?
Yeah, really, it's a matter of degree. So what I talk about in 40 plus BJJ, the training methodology doesn't change at all, like not one bit. So what 40 plus BJJ is about is taking strategy and tactics and considerations for the guys in the play. So, for instance. One of the things I talked about in my kind of like my flagship first course that I did, which is still my biggest one, like it's like 6 hours of instruction in the guard, is where a lot of, just from me personally, in my experience, as a blue belt, I was Mr. climbing armbar and triangle guy from guard. Like that's what I did, you know, try. And so, sure enough, I have a bad back and a bad neck, and I got stacked, you know, so many times. But I just grit my teeth and keep going for it. And I found from working with a lot of older guys, or seeing the effects of guys like me who started it, you know, later than others, but then got over 40. Right, we're all the same. We all have messed up necks, and so I just seen this across the population, not just personal experience, so much that, you know, part of what I would talk about is again, not trying to impose a game on people, but to say, you know, it's good in your skill set to have an upright guard, some sort of sitting guard, butterfly guard, whatever you want to call it. Even if that's not your favorite way to play, like naturally like, I mean, you could be a 50-year-old guy, but you could be quite flexible and really enjoy spider guard or something. That's cool. But do that under your terms, because if you can add into your arsenal some form of an upright guard, what are you not having done to you? You're not being stacked, right? And then it becomes more like a, you know, a sweep and get on top game, right? Or a guillotine or an arm drag game or something like that, all of which are relatively safe and low impact on you. And now, if you have, and it's also a very hard guard to pass, you know, once you kind of get good. Like it's typically not a one-step pass. Like somebody has to kind of break down your posture if your posture and movement's good. So I show, how to develop that. And even if you like playing off your back and you like spider guard and de la riva guard, whatever works for you, figure out how to do that under your terms. So you're not starting on your back necessarily all the time, and now somebody's crushing you from there, like the younger, faster, bigger, stronger, prototypical, mat rat guy who just lives on the mat where, sees you and you've got a purple belt on and he's a blue belt and he's like, yoked out and super athletic and he's trying to kill you and he doesn't realize it's like
taking 45 grams of nitro super pumped now with 5 times more caffeine.
Right. He doesn't realize that you're going to be on painkillers all day yesterday, all day tomorrow, at work. And, he's in the gym 6 hours a week and, or 6 days a week. And you come in twice, not only because your recovery is different than his, but because, you've got 4 kids and you've got, different stage of your life. You got more responsibility, you maybe you own your own business or you work. And so it's just, you're in a different place. And, so, do I want the first thing I do, like if I've got a bad neck or something like that, to play a game that's going to facilitate having a worse neck that will then put me out. So strategically, I'll talk about, for instance, here's one thing you can do. Develop this so that you start maybe sitting, develop the skill set to get the grips you want, and then you go to your back, pulling an angle under your own terms with your foot placement all lined up and everything. And now you can play that game without just starting there and getting smashed, So that would be one example of strategic things. And then a lot of it too is just applying this whole idea of so what's good for the good for the goose is good for the gander. Like applying some of the principles of the fundamentals and the philosophy behind it to make the training more efficient in some ways, which isn't a slam. You say, oh, my technique is better than your instructor's technique, but what I do well is disseminate and distill down techniques, all these, all the possibilities and the branches down into the posture pressure thing and make the position simpler. Like, what do you really need to know? What makes the engine run in this position? And you can figure out a lot of the particulars yourself. Like, I'll show you some as examples, but really here's the core root nuts and bolts you need for that part of the delivery system.
Well, I mean, it's sadly, it's true that there are a lot of really, really, really skilled people out there who can't teach their way out of a paper bag because they spend all this time working on their jiu-jitsu skills and not on their teaching methods. Right. So,
actually, I'll give you another piece because you just reminded me of this. So another distinction, we talked about fundamentals and
basics.
And basics. And we talked about between just like high rep static drilling and alive drilling, which, by the way, I think a lot of the the top camps right now, like for high level IBJJF competitors and stuff like that, they're producing, they may not use the exact same language we have, but like when you hear them talk and defending drilling, it's not just high rep static drilling. They're using protocols that are very similar, if not the same as what we're doing.
Most notably be positional sparring.
Yeah, but also or guided sparring or flow sparring, things like that. But they're all forms of isolation training. So that's what I'm saying. Like, it's not. I've seen quite a few of the examples of what these guys are doing, and even if they had their secret little sequence and transitional drill. Another distinction was that I think is interesting, because a lot of people don't think of this, is the difference between teaching and coaching. Teaching is about presentation, coaching is about performance, and a lot of times people conflate the two as well. So again, if I go back to let's say I'm that Professor X, like super high level, a lot of people will go, man, not only is he the best in the world or whatever, but or one of the best guys in the world, but what a great teacher. And again, that a lot of times means, as I look at it, as objectively as possible, because I don't have any skin in the game. Somebody's good, like I can learn from anybody, right? But if I look at through the lens of the coaching technology that, we've developed, which I think is excellent. And, we've really, seen it across broad populations. We've got, high level athletes, but we've also got, soccer moms and, all that, the hobbyists and things like that, everybody getting better. A lot of these things when I see people talk about, oh, what a great coach or a great teacher, what it really means is they're very, very articulate at presenting techniques that, again, are technical sequences where they're teaching, a style that won't work for anybody or teaching their style. So presentation-wise, yeah, like A+, they speak well, they're engaging, they're funny, they get the whole room like pumped up and everything. So there's a great benefit to that. To me, though, that's like if you take out the teaching your own style part, which will sabotage a lot of your students, that's the perfect person to teach, that foundations level or fundamentals level curriculum in your academy. When it comes to performance coaching, that's not who I want. And quite frankly, if somebody comes up who, through like our process or something, they could be a purple belt with a timer and a stopwatch or something like that, with a really good idea of like the tree that I gave you and how to do the I method, the intro, isolation, integration, which integration is rolling or sparring or whatever. And they're really good command of that. I could have a purple belt probably run a better performance coaching class than the high level guy that if you give people the choice, it'd be like, freaking crazy, like, Professor X is the man, right? But yet you got to kind of look at it outside of the emotional investments with, the champion and the hero and all that stuff, and kind of look at what's best for the students, right? And that gets to what you were talking about, I think, where it's like maybe they can teach their way out of a paper bag. They can teach their style and stuff, but can they coach, right? So yeah, they're going to have a few athletes who do well, but what about the broad population?
But they would do well.
They would do well under any circumstances, right? So that's another thing that I find interesting, and it's like people don't think about it. So we have, like in our coaching course, which we spend a lot of time, with our coaching program, training our instructors on our academy. I know you had my good friend Adam Singer on and everything. Like, we'll get together. Like Matt will run, coaching university, where we have in the room we've got Adam, me, a bunch of people who train multiple UFC fighters. Adam's got UFC world champion under his banner and everything. John Kavanaugh, who one of the top MMA teams. There's a bunch of us in there at that level of coaching experience, down to, coaches who may not have UFC guys, but are like really accomplished in, tournament, whatever, like successful programs. And we're all in there still trying to refine the coaching process.
Trying to learn how to learn. Or trying to learn how to teach.
Trying to learn how to teach and coach better. So one of the things that we'll talk about in there is, the totally distinct domains of performance coaching, teaching, your own personal game, because no matter how good at any point, that's going to be somewhat transient. You're not going to be on top forever. And you also shouldn't confuse your personal motivations for training with your students, right? Because they're going to fall into different brackets. So if you try and impose your passion and your motivations for training on other people, you're going to alienate a lot of people. And then even other aspects of it, like just because you're a good performance coach doesn't mean you're a good cornerman. Yeah. It doesn't mean that you're a good trainer in the back room. When I had to learn how to wrap hands and do the whole game about the back room and into the corner and stuff, that was an art into itself that I had to learn. It was completely separate from my ability to evaluate someone else's game, to grade them, totally separate, or to teach them how to be a better athlete. All different.
I completely agree. I know it's my interview with you, but
please. Yeah.
I'm a terrible cornerman, and I think it's because I'm a very tactile learner.
Yeah.
And so by the time, if I see two people rolling or fighting or whatever, and there's a strange situation, by the time I process it, I have to take it out of the visual, try and imagine myself, what would it be like if I was there? Okay, my arm is here, my leg is, and then by the time that I've translated that into, okay, I think I would do this, and it comes back out as a verbal thing, the position's already long gone.
Yeah.
Whereas I think maybe very, very visual learners are maybe better cornermen.
Yeah, but again, it's also a skill. You know,
Sure.
like some people maybe you know come better than others, but you know, like
just yell, stabilize, stabilize. What do? You do everything wrong. Stabilize.
Pound the mat. You know, I had the benefit of you know learning a lot from Mark Delagrati, who in turn took the opportunity. He was over in Thailand to you know apprentice himself to you know. Kutoy and everything like that. So, you know, literally what that means is like I'm in the corner with an incredibly experienced corner for dozens and then hundreds of fights, you know, as you go on. And
you got to absorb something.
Right. And my buddy Carl Tanswell, again, you know, like he's a great corner man and everything. He's got a whole system for it. And he actively like has coached his other people who do it in his academy, you know, his other trainers and stuff, often they're fighters themselves. He's coached them in that system, you know. So it's reps. It's like everything else. It's a skill.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great place to wrap it up. So speaking of teaching and learning, people want to be taught by you and learned by you. How do they get a hold of you? Like, what are your primary points of contact here?
Yeah, I do have. If somebody searches for 40 plus BJJ, just, you know, if you Google it, you'll come up with a bunch of results. 40 PLUS BJJ. I do have on my blog, there's a place to opt in for a free ebook and, you know, get communications from me from there and get onto the subscriber list. That's 40plusbjjlive.com.
Okay. And what about training with you in the flesh? Where's your school?
So I'm in Wareham, Massachusetts, which is down near Cape Cod. And that's SBGEastCoast.com.
Okay, cool. So those are, they can meet you in the flesh and they can meet you in the pixel.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
I really enjoyed this chat.
Me too.